Hi, Mrs. Norris here. So today we're going to be talking about the federal government of the United States, specifically focusing on the three branches of government. So before I get started, if you haven't yet done so, please either get yourself a piece of paper and something to write with, or open a Google Doc to take notes if you're a fast typer. So during this lecture, I have certain expectations. And if you're watching this on Zoom with us together as a class, this is where these expectations come into play. So first of all, stay in the Zoom meeting, especially because probably at this point, I still haven't taken attendance and you want to be counted for showing up. Your camera can be off when I tell you to do so. So not quite yet, but in a moment, you can turn your camera off. But again, stay in the Zoom meeting. If you have any questions or if you want to make a comment or an observation, anything like that, please use the chat window. But keep in mind that I'm the only one who can view that chat. So make sure that you are asking appropriate questions and making appropriate comments, and I will share the ones that I feel like have the best to contribute to our conversation. Make sure that you take notes, but not word for word. Don't try to copy down every single thing that I say on either that piece of paper or in a Google Doc. Not something that you're going to be submitting, but at the end of this, we're not taking our usual attendance. There's going to be an open note quiz on the material that I've talked about at the end of this lecture. So these are the things that you want to be able to know by the end of this lecture. You should be able to define each of these terms. So we have federalism, popular sovereignty, checks and balances, separation of powers, living document, and supreme law of the land. You should be able to answer the following questions. What are the three branches of government? What is the job of each branch? Who is in Congress? How is a new Supreme Court justice chosen? And why is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsberg so important right now? So by participating in this discussion, we're adding to our knowledge to answer the question, what were the legacies of the American Revolution? And I'll go into depth in just a moment about why it seems like we're jumping around when we haven't even talked about the 13 colonies yet. Not at this point anyway. So by the end of this lecture, you should understand that the Constitution established a government that balances power and interests through a system of checks and balances based on the separation of powers into three branches of government. So we're going to do this through lecture discussion about the federal government of the United States, specifically the three branches. So I know that this is not a normal time that we would be discussing this topic. Today is September 21st. It's really the start of our first unit where we should be discussing things like the 13 colonies and the events that led up to the American Revolution and America's independence from Britain. However, again, if you're watching this September 2020, we had the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that's going to have a huge impact not only on our election, but also on us as American people and choices that are going to be made for us by the Supreme Court. It's always important to talk about these things as they come up, and even if it doesn't exactly fit into a timeline, you should still discuss them. So that's why I'm choosing to discuss this now rather than wait until later, maybe in October or November, when we are talking about the Constitution and the three branches of government. So just a little introduction to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Supreme Court. Let's watch this video.
21 days into the month of September, and on the last official day of summer in the Northern Hemisphere, we welcome you to CNN 10. I'm Carl Azus, back in our home studio. Outside the U.S. Supreme Court, memorials appeared over the weekend. They were in remembrance of Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsberg, who passed away last Friday at the age of 87. In the Supreme Court's announcement of her death, Chief Justice John Roberts said America has lost a jurist of historic stature and that the Supreme Court has lost a cherished colleague. Justice Ginsburg had been battling pancreatic cancer since 2009. She'd served on the High Court since 1993, when she was nominated by President Bill Clinton. Ginsburg was the second woman to serve on the court. Before that, she'd worked as a law clerk, a law professor, a U.S. appeals court judge, and a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union. Women's rights was a deeply important issue to the Associate Justice.
In my lifetime, I expect to see 3, 4, perhaps even more women on the High Court bench, women not shaped from the same mold, but of different complexions. I surely would not be in this room today without the determined efforts of men and women who kept dreams of equal citizenship alive.
In recent years, Ginsburg served as the most senior member of the High Court's liberal justices. She took a liberal position in her votes on a number of controversial issues, from abortion to immigration to healthcare. But Ginsburg also shared a close friendship with Associate Justice Antonin Scalia, who was known for his conservative positions until his death in 2016. At that time, there was a political controversy over Justice Scalia's replacement, and it seems history is repeating itself ahead of the process to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, serve for life. That's why presidents regard these judicial appointments as such an important way to extend their own legacies. The Constitution does not set out a resume that a Supreme Court justice has to have. There's no requirement in the Constitution that a Supreme Court justice even be a lawyer. But traditionally, presidents have nominated impeccably qualified sitting judges. Both presidents and senators like to say that the confirmation process is all about qualifications, but it's really also about politics. Virtually every important issue in American politics and even American life winds up in front of the Supreme Court, and they have the last word. Both the president and the senators trying to figure out how the nominee stands on the hot button issues that the Supreme Court deals with. And that's why the senators will vote yes or no.
And it is the responsibility of the Senate to confirm or deny presidential nominees to the High Court. That's established by the Advice and Consent Clause of the U.S. Constitution. But a political fight is brewing over the timing of appointing Justice Ginsburg's replacement. Generally speaking, Republicans want to appoint conservative justices to the Supreme Court, though they don't have to vote that way. Democrats want to appoint liberal justices to the Supreme Court, though they don't have to vote that way. The president is a Republican, and the Senate is controlled by Republicans. So with an election coming in November, it may benefit Republicans to try to nominate and vote on Ginsburg's replacement now while they control the White House and Senate. This could help them appoint another conservative to the court. It may benefit Democrats to try to delay the process until the new year in the hopes their party will win control of the White House and or Senate. That could help them appoint another liberal to the court. Of course, it's a gamble any way you look at it because neither party knows what will happen in the election, and both parties want to look good to voters going into it. We will be following this controversy in more detail this week. As far as the current makeup of the Supreme Court goes, 5 of its members were appointed by Republican presidents. 3 of its members were appointed by Democratic presidents. 10-second trivia.
So let's look kind of closely, not too detailed, at the Constitution. So the Constitution was written after the United States gained its independence from Britain following the American Revolution. The supreme law of the land. This is what the Constitution is known as. And what that means is that no state can write a law that would be more powerful than what is written already in the Constitution. The Constitution is a living document. This means that as times change, the Constitution can be changed with them. So as our ideas about healthcare and women's rights and LGBTQ rights and immigration, as those ideas change for society, the Constitution changes with them. So the whole Constitution is built on this idea of federalism, which is this balancing of power between the national or the federal government and state governments. It also comes into play with the idea of popular sovereignty, and that's also a balance of power, but between the federal government and the authority of the people. So it should be based on the wants and needs of the people, not the wants and needs of just the government. So we have our three branches, and the idea of the three branches is to separate powers so that no one branch is more powerful than the others. So all three should really have equal power. And that comes in this system of checks and balances. So each branch can check the power of the others to keep the power balanced between all three. So that is why, for example, the president doesn't have supreme authority to just do whatever the president wants. It's the job of the other two branches to keep the president in check, so that if they try to get too much power, those other two branches can push them back and say, no, you need to chill. You know, this is not the time or the place. There's a process and you need to follow it. So first we have the legislative branch, and that's the group of people who are given the job of making the laws. Then we have the executive branch that puts the laws into practice. So once a law passes, it's the executive branch's job to make sure that it gets out to the people. And then finally, we have the judicial branch, and they interpret the law. So the judicial branch makes sure that when a law is written, it actually goes with the ideas of the Constitution. So let's look first at the legislative branch, which is also known as Congress. And again, their job is to make the laws. So in the legislative branch, we have the House of Representatives and we have the Senate. The House of Representatives is made up of 435 members. And a state's population will determine how many representatives they get. So a larger state will have more members in the House, while a smaller state will have fewer. A representative is elected into office every 2 years, and they can be elected repeatedly. It doesn't mean that after 2 years their job is done. They just have to go through the election process again. They must be at least 25 years old. They must live in the United States for at least 7 years, and they must live in the state that they represent. Now let's look at the Senate. On the other hand, the Senate has 100 members. So each state gets 2 senators. They're elected every 6 years, and they also have an unlimited number of terms. So the way that the 6 years works is it's not everybody all at once. So in 2 years, it will be a certain number of senators. And then in another 2 years, another certain number of senators. And then in another 2 years, another certain number of senators. And then the process starts over again. So they're technically elected every 2 years, but only by state. They must be at least 30 years old. They should have lived in the United States for 9 years, and they also must live in the state that they represent. Now, the executive branch. And again, the executive branch puts those laws into practice. So once they're passed by Congress, it's the executive branch's job to make sure that they get out to the people. So the executive branch is made up of the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. So obviously the president is the leader of the country. Now they're supposed to be elected by the people, but really it's the electoral college that votes on who the president is. So for example, when Hillary Clinton ran against President Trump, although Hillary Clinton had the most votes by the people, she won the popular vote, the electoral college was in favor of President Trump, and so he ended up winning. A lot of people believe that the electoral college is flawed for this reason and should probably be let go. So that's a fight that will possibly come under the Supreme Court. And then a president can serve 2 4-year terms, no more than that. That's what's written in the Constitution. The sole purpose of the vice president is to support the president. And should anything happen to the president while in office, such as they die or something like that, it's the vice president's job to step in. They are also the head of the Senate. So when Senate decisions are at a tie, it's the vice president's job to break the tie. Because remember, the Senate has 100 people. And then we have the cabinet. And the cabinet's job is to support the president and advise him on difficult decisions. They're nominated by the president, and then they are approved by the Senate. So you'll see a cabinet that is full of people that are going to support the president and his ideas, and by default, because the vice president is the head of the Senate, they're going to be approved by the Senate. So finally, we have the judicial branch, and they're the ones who make sure that the laws that are being written and carried out to the people actually follow the laws of the Constitution. So they interpret the laws. So we have 2 parts of the judicial branch. We have the Supreme Court and we have lower federal courts. So let's look at the lower federal courts first. They're just smaller courts that deal with cases that involve the federal government and federal laws. So when, for example, you sue the United States because you feel like you were wronged, it's going to go to a lower federal court, a local federal court, to be resolved. Now, if it's not resolved and you want to take it a step further, that's when it goes to the Supreme Court, because they're the highest court in the United States. These judges are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. Now remember, the vice president is the head of the Senate, so he kind of has some pull in that area. They serve a life term if they choose to, so the only way that they would leave their position is if they retire or if they die, such as the case with Ruth Bader Ginsberg. There are a total of 9 judges on the Supreme Court, a Chief Justice, and then 8 Associate Justices. And when there is a case that needs to be decided, a minimum of 6 judges need to agree to decide a case. Now, this is where our problem comes. Judges are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. And there is also the idea that they serve a life term. So we're dealing with an issue where we have a president in an election year who could possibly not lose or not win the election, and he still gets this opportunity to choose a Supreme Court justice who will help to shape the United States for the rest of their life. So that's a really big deal. And that's a part of the reason why the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg has become such an issue. So there have been a lot of important cases decided by the Supreme Court, but just a few of them. The Dred Scott versus Sanford, which we'll look at later because it was a factor that led to the Civil War. We have Plessy versus Ferguson, which established this idea of separate but equal. So the idea that there will be white restaurants and black restaurants, or white restrooms and black restrooms, and that they're supposed to be equal. But at the time, that wasn't really the case. And then Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregated schools, meaning schools specifically for Black children and for white children. We have Engel versus Vitale, which decided that prayer in school is unconstitutional. So the decision for this made it so that public schools like ours, who get funding from the government, don't require prayer at the beginning of each day. Gideon versus Wainwright establishes the right to a court-appointed attorney. So when you are read your rights, one of the things that they say to you is if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you by the court. That's because of this case. And then to follow that, Miranda v. Arizona, which was this idea that somebody who was arrested for a crime and admitted to that crime was not told that he didn't have to say anything if he didn't want to, and that he could wait for an attorney before he gave any information. So because of Miranda v. Arizona, if someone is arrested, they are required to say the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent and that whole thing. So when we look at our current court right now, there's an idea between right judges and left judges. So right-leaning judges, judges that tend to lead to the right, more the Republican and conservative judges, and then the left judges, judges that tend to lean more towards the left or the liberal Democratic side. So right now we have 5 right judges and 3 left judges. And then the moderates are the ones that sort of fall in between. So let's look at the right judges. Again, if you are a right-leaning judge, you tend to be more conservative and a Republican. Things like social inequality are believed by right judges to be just something that's going to happen. So we should just let things go as they're going to go. And the government should have a really limited role in people's day-to-day lives. A right-leaning judge or politician tends to believe that the government should not have too many rules over the people, especially when it comes to business and taxes. And they tend to not support social issues like women's, immigrants, and LGBTQ rights. On the left-leaning side, we have 3 judges currently. They tend to be more liberal or Democrats. They have a belief, many of them, not all, but many, that an equal society comes with help from the government. Social programs like welfare, unemployment, health care, left-leaning judges support these ideas. They tend to support the idea of high taxes for the rich and more control over business to make sure that it's running smoothly, following all of the rules, things like that. They also do tend to be more supportive of women's rights, immigrants' rights, and LGBTQ rights. And they have a strong idea of separating church and state, meaning the federal government and religion need to be separate at all times. So again, we have 3 right-leaning judges right now after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And 2 of those have been picked by Trump. So there's a fear that if he chooses another one, we now have a 3rd right-leaning judge picked by Trump and 6 right-leaning judges compared to 3 more liberal left-leaning judges. So this is a part of why RBG's death is such a big issue. The current president could lose the election, but he's still going to be in office until the beginning of next year. A new president isn't inaugurated until the beginning of January. So there's a period of time between November 3rd and the beginning of January, where the current president is still in office. They're often considered a lame duck president, whether they're leaving office because they served their 8 terms or because they lost an election. There's still that period of time where nothing that they really do could be that important, but it also could be incredibly important, just like what we're going through right now. So in the meantime, even if he loses, President Trump could appoint a new Supreme Court judge to take Ruth Bader Ginsburg's place. And he's already said that this is something he's going to do. So again, if he loses, he still has that power to put a 3rd judge, a 6th left-leaning conservative judge on the Supreme Court. So again, 2 current judges have been picked by him, so a new one would be a 3rd. And part of the issue surrounds something that happened in 2016. So in 2016, Justice Scalia died. And when he died, it was in the beginning of the year 2016, but 2016 was an election year. So because it was in the beginning, President Obama still had a very long time left in his term where he could have the opportunity to choose another judge. And obviously, because President Obama was a Democrat, it would have been a left-leaning judge. But the Republicans refused to appoint his nominee. So their reasoning was because he was going to leave office in 10 months, he shouldn't have the right to choose the next Supreme Court justice who would serve for their lifetime. So now we're in a similar situation with a smaller amount of time, only a couple more months until possibly President Trump leaves the office, and they're saying that they're going to support. So they're saying the opposite of what they said 4 years ago. So that's a frustration for a lot of Democrats and the public because they feel like it's going back on what they had already said and done and set a precedence for doing. There's also the idea that most Americans, the American public, think a new justice should not be chosen until after the election and possibly a new president is in office. So the idea is if President Trump wins, he's going to pick a new judge anyway, so why don't we just wait? But the Republicans and the Senate, who are led by Republicans, disagree. So again, this takes us to the idea that if a new judge is appointed by our current president, that person is going to be deciding on a lot of those social issues, including ones that involve the environment, women, immigrants, and LGBTQs. And if they're conservative, the idea is that they will probably vote a lot of these ideas down. So that's why there is this push to have a more liberal, more balanced justice, because they will serve for the rest of their life and they can help to pass some of these social issues that could come in front of the Supreme Court. So let's review. You should be able to define what federalism is, a balancing of power between the national or federal government and state governments, popular sovereignty, or balancing power between the federal government and the authority of the people, checks and balances, so each branch can check the power of the others, keeping power balanced between the 3 branches, separation of powers, no one branch is more powerful than the others, a living document. The Constitution is a living document that can be amended or changed as needed. And finally, Supreme Law of the land. No state can write laws more powerful than the Constitution. What are the 3 branches of government? And what is the job of each branch? So we have the legislative branch, which is Congress, and they make the laws. We have the executive branch, which is the president, who puts the laws into practice. And finally, we have the judicial branch, or the Supreme Court, which interprets the laws. Who is in Congress? We have the House of Representatives with 435 members that are chosen based on population and elected every 2 years. And then we have the Senate, which is 100 members, 2 per state, and elected every 6 years. And then finally, how is a new Supreme Court justice chosen? The president appoints a new Supreme Court justice and the Senate approves them. And why is the death of Ruth Bader Ginsberg so important right now? Because President Trump can pick a new justice, but some people think whoever wins the election should pick. He's already appointed 2. And in 2016, the Senate refused to approve President Obama's pick for Supreme Court justice, even though his term still had 10 months to go. So what do you think? If we're in the middle of class right now and we are on a Zoom, in the chat box, I want you to answer this question. Do you think President Trump should be able to pick a new judge in the next couple of weeks? Why or why not? So these points will be added to your quiz score.